Hi everyone, it's Amber and I am here to talk about the progress and status of the Wonderland art I've been working on. I've got my Mad Queen up here first, since that's what we've worked on most recently, at least on video. And I'm going to show you through some of the other stuff that I've currently got and talk about where we go from here. So we have our Mad Queen. I'm trying to get her into the camera as best I can. There we go. Off camera, I also did this Mad Hatter. He's got some hats in front of him, or them. I was trying to go for sort of a non-binary, gender fluid character. I thought that was really an opportunity. So there's my Hatter so far. Background on this one I inked just like the Queen, but a lot of it was oxide, distress oxide. So I sprayed some water and there's some lovely, looks like you can kind of see splatter effect that I really enjoy. This is my work so far on the Cheshire Cat. So I've been playing around with that. Haven't gotten too far, but that's what I've got so far. This, of course, is that abstract piece. I think I showed this in an earlier video, but this is something I really love. This is an early version where I was playing around with the white rabbit. There's an awful lot of iridescence. I don't normally work with a lot of iridescence, but I really was playing. So there's a lot of shiny stuff on here. I'm trying to kind of tilt it so that the light doesn't make it too blurry for you to see. There's things I really like about this. There's a lot that I really don't. This is not necessarily a piece that I think is one that I love, but I do enjoy some of where it landed. So I've been keeping it with the collection. This, of course, is our Queen when she's not mad. And then I also did another white rabbit. Not what I would call in its finished state. There's some stuff I'd like to do, especially to the background. I may add some additional weight and dimension on the rabbit here, but I do really like where this piece is. So, one thing I talked about a few times as I've been making the Queen is about, trying to get out of that perfectionist space that I'm in, trying to make sure that I experiment and let the process kind of be what it is. But the truth is that I have been really attached to a very specific outcome. Much more so than most of the work that I do. I usually kind of have a concept where I want to make a sea turtle or make a seahorse or paint an abstract using this specific paint. And that's pretty much as specific as I get. And I kind of pick a size block or paper that I want to work on and some media that I want to use and just go and see what happens. And 9 times out of 10, that leads me to work that I really like, that I feel like embodies who I am as an artist and definitely captures what I want to put out in the world. It usually leads to things that surprise me in a really good way. But the more I get down to specificity, like I have with this Wonderland collection, where I think like, oh, I'm going to make these characters and I'm going to use them like paper dolls, and we're going to have interchangeable hats, and maybe the Cheshire Cat here will have interchangeable faces, and we're going to have this queen that's super angry, and I want this specific this and that, and I'm going to use them as journal pages in this way. And I've gotten so prescriptive that a few things are happening. One is, it just feels like homework and I kind of don't want to do it. Like, I am getting to the point now where I'm like, I should go work on Alice, and it's like, ugh, do I have to? I don't feel like drawing her stupid face. And I'm literally having a conversation in my head where I'm thinking, like, do it now so that it's easier to use the same kinds of media and the same kinds of techniques, and you'll forget what you've done if you wait a couple months before you get to her, etc., etc. And there's a real resistance there, and I try really hard to listen to my intuition, listen to that kind of resistance, and understand, you know, why I'm feeling that way. So if I'm really struggling to get myself painting, which is usually the thing I most want to spend my time doing, is painting or creating in some kind of way, if I'm suddenly looking to procrastinate on that, something's wrong. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that I do like a lot of the work I've produced. I like my queen, you know, I like my hatter. I mean, that's just a sweet little face, a lot of color. Enjoy the weird spirally curly hair. Like, there's a lot to like, but the art is not what I envisioned for the collection. I don't think it's going to fit with the aesthetic of other things I know I want to include in the journals. I want to play a lot with playing cards, and that just, they're okay together, but they don't fit. I want to be able to use some original imagery. You know, one of the nice things about the original book and illustrations being in the public domain is that you get to actually play with them. And I found some ephemera using, please excuse my voice, I'm hoarse. I've been dealing with allergies really badly, and I know I sound like a bit like a frog. But I really want to be able to play with those. I found some ephemera online that I'd like to be able to print and use exactly as is. You know, I want to be able to use a bit of a vintage aesthetic. I'm not one of those people who's like straight vintage distress. I don't want only text and coffee dye, tea dye, brown, beige, neutral, vintage. Like, I like to play with a lot of color. Obviously, I want to be able to have my style of grunge, which is much more colorful and a bit more chaotic and just different from that, right? But I still want to be able to include that stuff, that real vintage stuff. And I feel like this queen would clash with that. And in a minute, I'm going to show you one of those original images with a little bit of a twist. So you'll see what I mean if you're not familiar with the original art. So the truth is, I've made some artwork that is, you know, I don't dislike, but is kind of fine. And I don't want to keep making it. And I think working so hard towards that specific outcome is really stifling me creatively and affecting some of what I do. And so I took a step back. You know, some of the reason I made so much of this off-camera stuff was because I was trying to kind of take a step back and reevaluate some things and play around without being on camera. Some of it was just because the cat kept getting in the way, and so I was constantly interrupted, and it was very hard to do a video. But I kind of take a step back and say, well, what do I really love, right? This, for all of its flaws, is really interesting, at least as like background imagery. This, I love. I could make 20 of these. Different colors and stencils and techniques and come up with a bunch of different ways to make stuff using the same colors and end up in a place where everything kind of goes together, and it just is yummy. I love this. I love my rabbit. Play around. I don't know what it is. I am not one of those people who I think is a super talented artist from a hand drawing perspective. Like, I think, you know, I've mentioned before, like, I'm not trying to reproduce anything to a sort of photographic quality. And if I tried, it doesn't end up there 9 times out of 10, probably even less frequently than that. And so a lot of times when I draw things, I have to remind myself that I'm making a representative or interpretation kind of that object, and not trying or striving for, you know, very true to life representation. With rabbits, I really like the way that they turn out. They're fairly true to life for me. Like, this guy looks like a rabbit in every sense, and you know, there's definitely some stylistic stuff here, but I don't know what it is with me. I really like drawing rabbits, and I really like the way they turn out most of the time. And more of like a hare type of rabbit, not like a fluffy bunny, but like a hare. It's a little bit more, it's got more angles and a little bit more interesting. I don't know. Anyway, when I look at what I really love, which is these pieces, and to some extent, the backgrounds of these pieces, and I say, okay, well, how could I maybe just keep working with that? So part of it is I've scanned all of these. The likelihood is I'm probably going to paint over all of them. I'm going to paint over this queen. I'm probably going to paint over this hatter. Or I might keep the hatter, but not so much for the overall collection. Definitely thinking I'll paint over this queen, and I'll probably play around with other abstract pieces, and stuff like that. Maybe even sketch some more hairs in different poses and things like that, since that's working for me. But that's really where my heart is with the work I've done so far and with what I want to do next. You know, I also really love playing with media that I'm not getting to use right now because they just are harder to use in the ways that I was trying to do things for character work. But like getting out my acrylic inks again and playing and doing some really abstract stuff and just going where the work takes me, that's how I want to spend my time. But I also still really want to make an Alice journal. It's been something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and now that I'm getting more and more into junk journaling, art journaling, altered books, all of that, like, it's a great opportunity to spend some time in that space. And I don't just want to print out other people's printables. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's great. I'm ideally still creating printables to share with you all. I use printables tons. It's just, I'm really looking to do something that feels unique to me. So I thought, well, what if I take things like these backgrounds and those original images and book text and other things like that, you know, how would I reimagine them? And so I mentioned the original illustrations are public domain. That means I can use them, reproduce them, reinterpret or reimagine them. And I took one of the images, one of the illustrations from the original book, where the men dressed as cards are painting the roses red. So if you're familiar with the movie, the original Disney movie, the book, whatever, then ideally you'll remember the scene where they're painting the roses red for the Queen of Hearts. And I took this abstract and I played around in Photoshop. And this is a prototype. It's not what the finished one is going to look like. I've already made a bunch of changes. But this is a printout of what I've done so far in Photoshop. And this is where my head is at in terms of what I want for my journals. So the abstract is coming through various parts of the original illustration now. I'm coloring it. I just used this background that I had already scanned, but since then I've taken actual pages from the book and scanned them and redid the image with text from the book, from Alice in Wonderland, right? I started playing with some of the other illustrations and doing similar things, using this background and pulling it through to color pieces of the imagery. At some point, I'll probably print more of those off and do some things with splatter and other types of art, and then rescan them, layer, and then turn them into things like tags for a journal, journaling cards, other things like that. This really is much closer to where I want to be than this. And while those two, you know, maybe I will end up using some of this work in the collection that I create for the journal, but not in the way that I originally imagined or intended, not with this whole paper doll plan, not with these predetermined outcomes in my head of what the art should look like when I know in the end it's not going to look like that. That's just not the kind of artist I am. And this just feels way more authentic to me and to what I'm trying to achieve, and in a way that still allows me to be spontaneous and abstract and do things that are new and different and play and not worry about the outcome, and then pull it all together digitally to create something refreshing and interesting and new and really true to me and my sort of vision. The other thing I want to show you, originally when I started playing around with the idea of making art and turning it into a journal, I anticipated making my own junk journal from, you know, various paper, junk, scraps, etc. And then using my original art, either the original or printables made from scanned pieces to create the work. I haven't deviated too far from that, but what I have done is started to work on this book, Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, right? So the two books that I think of as the Alice in Wonderland. I originally bought this very inexpensively on Thrift Books, by the way. Major shout out to Thrift Books. I buy almost all my books from Thrift Books, whether they're, you know, art reference pieces or books that I want to use for journaling, artwork, etc. So I bought this very inexpensively. Originally, I just planned to rip pages right out of it, and because there's a million copies of Alice in Wonderland in the world, and use those as collage fodder to create, you know, ephemera for the journal. But when I took a closer look at the book itself, if you can see, this is actually the kind of book that I think is a pretty good candidate for creating an altered book, where I'm actually going to be able to use this book to create the journal itself. I might be wrong. I have not done a lot with altered books yet, but the pages were sewn in, not glue bound like most modern books, where you can actually see the sewing. I'm trying to, there we go. You may be able to see the stitching in there. You know, with traditional signatures, if you're familiar with signature binding or how books are bound, it's with, you know, pages that are folded up like this and sewn into the spine, which makes it easy for me to remove some pages so that as I add things into the journal, it's not gonna get so bulky that it can't hold all of the material. It is a little thicker than a book I might normally use, and yes, there is some stuff that just does not lay super flat when it opens, but I'm not looking for perfection here anyway. I think I can work with that. So I am planning to use this book as the journal that I will eventually create for my Alice in Wonderland journal, with all of the pieces of art that I create and digitize and manipulate in Photoshop and what have you. So ultimately for the channel, that means that you're going to see my work moving in some different directions. We're going to focus a lot less on things like creating specific characters and a lot more of me just filming myself as I play around with paint and see what happens. And possibly with some of the ephemera I start to create, and, you know, other things that I create as digitals for the journal, or things that are not at all Alice in Wonderland related, because I tend to like to work on a lot of different projects and different themes and things all at the same time. It helps keep things really interesting for me. So if you've been following along thus far, thank you very much. I hope you understand now some of the changes I'm making and why. You probably don't care as much as I do. But I just think it's really important, you know, if you have been following along and you're looking for some of this stuff, or you notice a shift, or you don't see those, you know, characters and some of this art in the final journal that I end up creating down the road, this is why. And I wanted to be very transparent about that too, because I think a lot of times we get stuck trying to create some idea we have in our head and get very disappointed when it doesn't go the way we hoped or imagined. And that's definitely what happened to me here. The truth is, like I said, I am much happier making work and with the end product when I start without those very specific end goals in mind. So the more attached I am to a specific outcome, the less likely I feel like I am to achieve that outcome, enjoy getting there, or fall in love with the end result. This was, let's just have a play. I need to cover up a painting that I did that I don't really like. That's when I first tried to make the Mad Queen, and she didn't look mad. She just looked like she was shouting to her girlfriends. Like that was what was this piece. And I wanted to cover it up. And then I decided to just goof off and play around with colors in the palette. And it ended up being the favorite thing that I've made so far. That's exactly how I work. And so if you have been trying to make art and finding that you're not happy with the work you're doing, I would suggest you ask yourself, how much do you have a very specific end in mind, an outcome that you're attached to before you even begin? And when it doesn't live up to that specific outcome, is that your primary source of disappointment? What happened if you gave yourself just a couple of parameters, enough to get started without, you know, I know a lot of us open up a pad or something, and we see this blank piece of paper, and that's overwhelming. And so by all means, you know, part of what I did when I created this abstract piece was grabbed some acrylic paint that was very specific to the color palette I was planning to use. I started with this heart stencil because I knew I wanted hearts, because that's a thematic image that's really present in, you know, Alice in Wonderland. So I start with a few parameters, and then 9 times out of 10, I just force myself to make a few marks on the page, just do something so that it's no longer blank and it's already, for lack of a better word, ruined, right? I've already made a mess on the page. It can't get worse, can it? And just see what happens from there. That works for me. And so if you, like me, find that when you try really hard to create that very specific image, that very specific outcome, and you find that you're disappointed and you feel not great about your work because just this does not speak to me, this does not feel authentic to the artist that I am or what I'm trying to express. Again, it's fine. I don't dislike it. There's a lot to like about it. It's just, this isn't where I feel like I am expressing what I want to put out into the world. And so if you keep landing in that spot and you keep working with that very specific outcome in mind every time you get started, I would suggest just challenging yourself to start with fewer of those outcomes in mind and just give yourself a couple of prompts, give yourself a couple of parameters to work within, and then play and let go and let the art take you where it's gonna take you. And then I won't be a bit surprised if you're happier with it at the end. And if it's the kind of thing you would have never thought to create in the first place, but when you're done, you're so glad you did. That's what I'm looking for when I make art. And that means that I need to get back to that place of play and of exploration and experimentation. Thank you very much for listening to this update, following along thus far. I hope you're excited to see where we go from here. I know I am. I'm more excited than I have been since I started. And next video could be anything.